Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast. We are going to go into vibe coding and all the things that I am learning about in terms of vibe coding as I just ask Claude Code to build me things. And I feel like I'm in a stock machine, or I feel like I'm in a slot machine, casino, where sometimes I get something. I've now stopped paying for Descript, although it's funny because now we're recording this on Riverside, and Riverside does the same thing as Descript. But before I go into that, I've now stopped paying $60 a month for my Descript because I was able to use the Claude Code to build a solution that does what Descript does. So I was able to stop paying that, and now we're.
So I wonder if Descript knows that.
I think they're now at the stage where they're too big to understand it. Actually, one of my friends is the CFO of that company, and I think they're just like in the same position as Duolingo, same position as all of these companies that don't really understand LLMs and don't have the time to understand it because their business process is already stuck. So I think they're going to fail to productize. Duolingo. Really weird. The CEO of Duolingo recently said, we're now an AI first company when it comes to building the product, but no mention of how awesome LLMs are for learning languages and how that could be built into the product itself. So it feels, yeah.
It's like a politician making a statement without knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't remember how I came across this. Oh, because I read this article about a lot of the tools that are helping deaf or near-deaf people deal with the real world. And there's a Google program called Live Transcribe, which is, I don't know if you've used it, but it's very interesting. And all it does is transcribe, but it is nearly perfect.
What is it transcribing? Like it's transcribing the audio as you watch it and stuff like that? It could be
yourself, if you're just speaking. And if you're talking to someone else, it transcribes both people.
It's called Google Transcribe.
Yeah, Live Transcribe.
Live Transcribe.
Now, there's also Google Translate, and I believe that Google Translate can do the same thing while it's translating. And I've actually used that feature before, actually in a lawyer's office, talking about an unnamed person, because I don't want anybody to know, but about their immigration status. And everybody was talking Spanish, and I don't. So I had Google Translate translating in real time as people were talking, so I could pick up what they were talking about. So this real time stuff is very interesting. And so if you're sitting there as the CEO of Duolingo, you have to know that the real time technologies are getting usable. So you can hold an iPhone while you're talking to somebody. You can speak in one language, the other person hears it in their language and then speaks in their language, and you hear it in your language, which raises a question of why do you need to learn new languages if, other than sort of an academic interest or not wanting to hold a phone up while you're doing it. But there are also audio technologies that are coming along that promise that if you have a pair of glasses on, you'll have the same functionality, so you won't have to hold a phone. You'll just be talking to the other person and responding in their language. And I think only one person needs that. So I think Duolingo is toast for a different reason, which is you don't really need Duolingo anymore.
Well, and I still think a lot of people are going to want to learn languages, even with that. But the pure functionality of needing to learn a language is going to go away.
Yeah, which will change the whole dynamic. So anyway, let's go back to vibe coding, and I'll turn it around here and interview you. So you were talking about vibe coding and how well you could tell whether it would be successful or not. Maybe you just kind of recap that.
So basically, I can't tell. So this is a probabilistic technology. So I'll explain my flow of what I do right now. So right now, Claude Code is excellent for building the applications in a one-shot manner. So that means if I get it the right prompt, it will sometimes build the app in the right way, about 20% of the time. And so what I do now, in order to get the right prompt, the Claude Code is no good for that. So I have to go to Google Gemini 2.5 chatbot and have a conversation and bring in all the documentation into that to construct the perfect prompt, which Google Gemini 2.5 does. Then I take that prompt and then I put it into Claude, hoping that it will work. And as I mentioned, about 20% of the time it does work. I end up and the cool thing is it's probabilistic. So it means that it's sometimes exactly what I want, but usually because it's just like this butterfly effect, it leads to something better than I want with some sort of new implementation. But that's very rare. Most of the time, it just ends up not working. And then usually what happens, I do it on my local computer. So then I use it in Next.js, which is a language for, I actually don't know what it is, but and then I hit npm run dev, brings up the local host, allows me to test it. Usually with Claude Code, and this is the key part I'm just realizing now, is that usually it takes 3 to 5 bugs, and then Claude Code either gets it or that I get stuck in what's called a doom loop. And in the doom loop, I can spend hours in the doom loop because it could work. It could work after those 3 to 5 turns in the conversation of fixing the bugs. But it could also mean, and this is what I got into for 5 hours last night, was just like stuck in doom loops after doom loops after doom loops, and nothing worked. This isn't traditional programming. I'm not learning how to read the code or write the code or anything like that. I'm just having a natural language conversation with this. Then there's another piece, which is I bring Cursor into it. And so once it's actually built, then I use Cursor, and Cursor is an IDE fork of Visual Code Studio that has AI LLMs directly built into it. So it allows me to get visibility into what Claude Code built. I think at some point I'm going to have to learn what's going on in terms of the code in order to get, but it's like so difficult because and I talked with a senior developer yesterday who's building these crazy things, and AI helps him to build the crazy things. But we're in fundamentally different positions because I recognize that in a year, I'm not going to get better than the AI at coding. It's a race.
You're depending on the AI getting better.
Yeah, there's kind of no reason to learn all of the coding. There's something I need to learn, but I don't know what it is, and it's really weird. It's so weird being in these probabilistic doom loops because it's just like a strange psychology that I've never heard of before.
So before you got to Cursor, you were
Claude Code
saying that you'd get into these doom loops and you'd just keep iterating, trying to fix the problem. That's by changing the prompt, or because you're having a conversation with the AI where you started with the prompt and you're trying to modify it through natural language. Is that am I understanding that correctly?
Let me show you. Let me get this set up. Okay, yeah, it's right on the right screen. Just going to give me 1 second here. Okay. Hopefully I don't have any. Yeah, this is fine to show. So this is Claude Code. Welcome to Claude Code. It's all in the terminal. And so right before the show, I realized that I'll explain the product I'm trying to build. I'm trying to get automatic full end-to-end coverage of, as soon as we stop this conversation, have a transcript come out, have all of it come out so that it can immediately be published into Transistor, where I publish all the podcast episodes. And I spent all night last night trying to figure it out. And then I researched this morning that Riverside actually has an API. So this is my attempt to, I got the prompt here, which I did with Gemini. So I've got this prompt here that I put into it. And then the key problem is that Claude Code doesn't have the documentation. So I asked it to ask me questions about what it needs in order to clear up any ambiguities, which is a new flow that I just got crystallized this morning, which is that I need to ask it to ask me questions about what it doesn't know. And then it went in, and here the key problem is that it can search the web, but some web things shut off programmatic searching. And so it shut off that, and now it's trying to build something. I interrupted it because I really need to get it the documentation before, because that's the key thing, is that the hallucinations increase if it doesn't have the documentation. But it has no self-awareness to tell me when it doesn't have the documentation unless I ask it to do that, which is what I just figured out.
So the documentation acts as kind of a RAG?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Gives it guardrails. And
yeah.
So I understood all of that. And there's a kind of, it's the wrong term, uncanny valley
Yes,
between
exactly.
wanting,
That's where I'm. Yeah,
right, between wanting to have code made for you and how much you need to know to get the code written correctly.
that's a really good way to put it. Uncanny valley.
Which is ever more. When I went and talked to you many episodes ago about the last one was this fantasy that you could have a program generator, is what they referred to it back in the days, where it would write the code for you. So it was the last one you would need. So you could have programs that you wrote yourself without knowing how to program. So this, like, people have been fantasizing about this for decades, 40 plus years.
And this is really good. I really like the uncanny valley. That's where I'm stuck. It's a weird psychological headspace I need to get into. And it's so interesting because I'll give an example from my normal life, which is also probabilistic, which is that I'm trying to get my residency. I'm trying to renew my student visa after going back to the United States and getting all of my documents for the Argentine government, running into a lot of problems with the bureaucracy in the United States, then coming back here and getting shut down by a 2,000 USD translation bill because the official College of Translators in Buenos Aires has decided to unilaterally, because they're a cartel, raise their prices on translation. A year ago, it would have cost me $100. Now it cost me $2,000. It was sort of like an affront to my sensibilities, and so I'm like, okay, screw it. I'm not going to get this visa that I spent all this time and money trying to get. I'm going to go renew the student visa. And so I go in and I interface with the bureaucracy, and it's totally probabilistic. It's like there are no written rules. It's all up to the bureaucrat. It's all going to these random locations that I have to go to make an online payment. And so I've experienced this in Latin America for the past 20 years. And it's so frustrating because it's probabilistic and there's no documentation on how to get there. And so I get it stuck in a doom loop there. And so now I'm doing it in coding in the uncanny valley of, and it is like the uncanny valley of the images, but it's psychological and it's linguistic. And it's like, I have to have huge activation force to go through this, but now I'm getting used to that. Now I've done it enough times where I enjoy it. Well, I enjoy having the final product. I don't enjoy the doom loops at all. It's very strange head state to be in.
So I was just looking up the word probabilistic because you used it like 10 times. I needed to make sure I understood what you're saying. So it means you don't have a direct line between what you want.
Yes, nonlinear. And this is what the interview, I did 2 interviews in the past 2 days, all about this probabilistic. And the probabilistic thing is just the token predictor. The fact that it predicts the token means that you can get one version, you give it the same exact prompt, and you get a wholly different version. And that's what I meant, and I like that.
Probabilistic, yeah.
Yeah, rather than the deterministic, which is what we've talked about in the last, with the last 60 years of computer science. That's all deterministic, right? That's the problem with it.
Deterministic, that the outcome depends on your ability to determine the outcome by writing code. And so there are different kinds of programmers, right? And the concept that I think has gone by the wayside now is machine code, which is that you can address the processor directly to tell it what to do in a program. So you write machine code that is controlling the processor and telling the machine what to do. And that's in Bill Gates' biography, because that's what he would do. And he had no screen, no interactive system, so he had to conceptualize in his head what the program should do, try it, and then try to figure out what's wrong with it. That's deterministic.
And I'm building that skill. And the funniest thing is that it's so there's one aspect where the AI can generate the code. The other aspect, and the much more influential aspect, and the one that nobody talks about, is that it's an omnimath that can teach me how to do it. So I can also learn how to do it, but there's this trade-off of whether it's actually worthwhile to do it, if it'll be able to generate it. But so that is really interesting, because that allows me to then learn the command line interface, which you just talked about with Bill Gates, which is that it's all text-based. It's all text-based in the background. It's like the servers, the computers, it's all text-based. It's really weird to understand that.
Well, to get to the baseline, it's like the computer can only understand that you're saying 1 or 0. And the easiest way to express that is in text.
Yeah. Okay.
Do 1, do 0, do 1, do 0, do 0, 0, 0, do 1, 1, 1. It's like, as far as the computer's concerned, it's just like 1s and 0s. You're turning it on and off. So at each higher level, you have a greater level of abstraction, but it still has to be translated at some point into 1s and 0s, just really fast. And then you have an architecture where they're at the baseline, the 1s and 0s are talking to the central processing unit, but there's also like memory allocation and I/O, input, output, and so there are all these things going on simultaneously. And so to control the whole environment, so the people that are maintaining the kernel, the Unix kernel inside of Mac OS, for instance, are talking directly to the kernel. The people that are sitting above that are talking to their API. It's like a...
So it is fun because this goes back to the history of it, and you can answer the history of it. There's there's Unix guys at Apple still who are maintaining the Unix, and they need to maintain the kernel because they make changes at the other types of abstractions, and then that will affect the
kernel itself from time to time has to have new capabilities to deal with the stuff that's happening around it. So the kernel is being modified continuously to handle new primitives, if you will.
Like LLMs? Is there an LLM primitive?
LLMs don't go to that level. That's why they run on graphics processing units or GPUs, because GPUs were designed to blast pixels to the screen as fast as possible, which is why they were applied to video games. And that the process for building an LLM, in other words, predicting the next token, is very similar. It's very simple. It's a very simple primitive. And so particularly NVIDIA figured out that they could use everything they learned about making graphics processing units to make essentially token processing units, which are very similar in design to GPUs. So the question I've always had is, so these chips that NVIDIA is selling to process LLMs, I wonder if there's still GPUs and can still make video games better.
You mean like maybe it's been taken out of its original context of video games,
modified enough that it's not relevant.
It's something
or it's just like making video games. You don't want to spend all that much money on GPUs. It's only 1 or 2 in a computer that makes the video game video processing work better. So these are mysteries to me because I can't go that deep.
And the crazy thing, because an LLM can teach you about going that deep, and it can also explain it like I'm 5, which is really funny when it starts talking about Lego blocks and as if you were 5 and condescending to you ask it to condescend to you. So I got a question about the history and also as it relates into building AI, because everything you just explained, don't you think that needs to be re-architected? Maybe it doesn't because it's all abstractions. And if it doesn't need to be re-architected, well, actually the question I would like to go into first is, at what year did that all come together into this kernel Linux? It's probably like 90s.
I'd say earlier, because AT&T designed Unix. They designed it to be network-based, machine-independent. So there was a layer of abstraction in Unix, I think, and this is me just trying to be logical. I think what they did was they designed a relatively thin layer of abstraction between the microprocessor and
the what?
And the kernel that is attached to it. There's a thin layer of abstraction that then can be applied to any computer. It's why virtually Microsoft never decided to adopt the Unix kernel. So they still have their own kernel that is really a derivative ultimately of DOS, disk operating system, MS-DOS, which has limitations. And Microsoft's always had to work around those limitations. And, so a lot of the security issues in Windows are a result of the fact that they never really adopted a kernel that...
Okay, so you just said something really important. Said so Unix was adopted by Apple in the late '90s through Next.
Well, that was,
Microsoft
they
never.
bought Next, and Next was based on Unix.
Okay, and before that, Apple was on MS DOS.
No, it wasn't. It was on, it used the Motorola 6502, and it had its own kernel, but it was custom designed by Steve Wozniak, basically. And that was the operating system for the Macintosh until they bought Next, and Steve transitioned the whole Mac operating system and ecosystem onto a different processor. Now, they did a pit stop on the Intel processor for a couple of generations of Macintosh, and then they figured out how to move from that to Next OS.
Got it. And that was like 95, 97, something like that. That was all when Steve Jobs was out of the picture when they were on Intel?
Yeah, they did the Intel transition, I think. And I mean, I'm having a hard time remembering exactly when, but when Apple bought Next, which was in 97, Steve brought in Xavi Tavanian as chief software guy from Next. And he figured out how to move everything. And I can't remember if he made the pit stop to Intel or if they went directly to Unix.
Do you know Tavanian? Could we get him on the show?
I'd have to track him down. I haven't talked to him in 20 years. I think he just retired from Apple.
Oh.
No, he didn't. He did something else. But I mean, he is an American software engineer, born 1961. So, relation Apple, Next, career. Apple. I left Apple in 2003. Nope. Okay. And then he was a chief software technology officer at Apple from 2003 to 2006. There he redesigned Next Step to become Mac OS. And that might have been on the Intel processor, but because now Apple makes its own silicon, there's all these things happening at the same time, and that's based on the ARM architecture, which is true for servers now. The only computers that don't use an ARM architecture are the Windows Intel machines, Windows Intel.
Wow.
And they've never made that transition. So they've had it. So this is part of why Intel is in such trouble. They haven't really had a dominant reference architecture since the Intel architecture for PCs. So they still are the architecture for Windows computers. But Windows computers have been a little isolated from both, say, mobile, which is all ARM, including Android.
Interesting.
And but also the reason Apple made real strides on the Macintosh is they finally moved off the original Apple architecture and adopted a Unix kernel. And you can see it sometimes
on the phone.
When you're like,
on the phone.
The phone is ARM at the base right now. Their Macintosh silicon is also ARM, so the processor architecture is now common, which is why people expect the Mac and iOS to merge, which won't happen. But that's a separate issue.
So there was this period from 2000 or whatever until 2007 or 2008 when the Intel had to be slowly moved off because we're talking about really large systems. Is that right? Like a
Not
kernel.
Sure I understood the question.
So on the computer, you were talking about how Veneman basically in 2006 switched something to Mac OS fully, completely off of Intel. Yeah. So there's
Mac
these
large... Mac OS has been Mac OS, right? So we're able to abstract to Mac OS at a much higher level, and first Intel and then their own silicon underneath it, so that what you're looking at in a Mac kind of looks like it did used to, but the whole innards are changed. And when they did their own silicon for the Mac, I'm trying to remember the processor they used originally for the iPhone. I can't remember that. They didn't make their own silicon at the time. That was a Tim Cook triumph that he built the resources inside the company that they could do their own silicon design based on the ARM architecture.
What is a processor?
Okay, well, you got different ones. Like there's a GPU, which is graphics processing unit.
Okay. Yep.
And then you have a CPU, which is a central processing unit. And then a computer, desktop computer like the one or a notebook, they have a central processing unit that controls how all of the different pieces of the computer operate. And then you have software on top of that, which are programming languages or firmware or applications like the one we're using right now. In a phone, the architecture is different because there's no disk, there's no no spinning storage, or I don't even know if they have spinning hard disks now. Might be all static RAM. They might be using digital storage instead of hard disks.
You said the CPU arranges all of these things together. What are those things? What are all those things?
Storage, input, output, the network protocols. Stuff coming in and out of the computer all the time. The operating system orchestrates all that, and then talks to the central processing unit. But the central processing unit talks directly to storage and input, output, and other functions. Like Bluetooth is a hardware thing.
And all the kernel does is interacts with the machine and the CPU. Let's
say that, yes. I mean, we're at a level where I can't tell you exactly how it works.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a mystery to
me.
But
you were asking all these questions in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that.
I was asking precisely about this. So if there's a kernel, what part of the processing? So I had this conversation. It was Rob Glazer, I believe, that told me this.
Yeah.
He said, well, there's a ring. There's a series of rings. And I think this is in the kernel, right? The central ring, the one right in the middle of the other rings. Anyway, it's like, and this is designing the operating system. This was a Microsoft operating system. So, and at one point, IBM did its own computer that didn't run Windows, and I don't know what that
computer that didn't run Windows. So they built their own kernel, their own
operating system. Their kernel was Unix based, I think. It was a period of time where Unix was harder to use because you had to license it from AT&T, and there was all kinds of politics there. And then Linux was developed separately as an open source version of Unix, and they avoided having to do that license. God, I mean, this is really into a lot of the details.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how. Yeah, so I'll go to that. So VS Code. I'm not sure if you know that Cursor. That Cursor took the open source MIT license from Microsoft, or from Microsoft created VS Code, and VS Code is the editor which all the people use to code. And then they created an open source version, and then they created a closed source version. And there's a question there about open source and Microsoft, because my understanding of Microsoft was
purely proprietary.
Yeah. And then somehow they made this VS Code that did have an open source, and then Cursor took that VS Code and made a giant $1 billion application running off of that is now just an awesome piece of technology that I think is the only really solid productization of LLMs in this first wave of AI. Like really, really beautiful, that I use every day. Claude Code is also another one. But so now Microsoft is reacting by making all of their proprietary VS Code stuff incompatible with Cursor. So they're shutting Cursor out of their whole ecosystem. And can you explain how that happened business-wise with Bill Gates and everything like that? How did Microsoft get it into that they would not only release an open source, but I imagine that was in the 2000s after they were already sort of dying. What was going on?
They're dying, by the way. They're still worth
they're
$3
not
trillion.
Dying now. Yeah.
There was an interregnum between Bill Gates and Satya Nadella.
Okay.
It was Steve Ballmer.
Yeah.
Ballmer was a salesman and really didn't understand these issues, and
Yeah.
so he was running around being a little Elon Musky. At one point he actually stood up on a couch and jumped up and down. And it was his personality he thought could drive it. So he bought companies that really didn't make sense, and people were sitting around going, what the hell is he doing? And then finally the board removed him and hired Satya Nadella as the new CEO, who's done a pretty good job. Anyway, so you had a period of time there, the company was run by a non-technical person, which is why when I suggested Tim Cook resign or retire, he needs to find a young technical person to run Apple, because they're kind of they're missing the cues now in terms of technology.
Yeah. So this feels like a perfect opportunity to kind of mine some anecdotes from Bill Gates. We've probably talked about it a bunch of times. We've probably talked about when you first met him. Have we talked about that?
Well, the first time I sat down with him is the one I remember. And I arranged an interview with him. He knew who I was because I'd been obnoxious in columns. In particular, when I was running Infold the first time. Let me get this in order. We wrote a review of Windows 365, which was very damning. But Windows 365 probably happened my second time around.
I'll research when Windows 365.
Yeah, so I may get the timeline screwed up here, but the first time I sat down with him, so I had seen him before and shook hands and talked to him in a group. But the first time I sat down with him was after I'd started my newsletter. And I flew up to Seattle, and their original office was not in Redmond, where they are now. It's in a different town on the east side of Lake Washington. And it was just like a rental building. I'm guessing maybe it had 100, 200 people in it. So this is very early on. And it might have been actually while I was still editor of Infold the first time. And at some point I found my notebook from a conversation I found in one of the boxes.
Recently?
That I have. Yeah, well, sometime in the last couple of years. And I flipped through it, and my notes are not very illustrative because I have a tendency to just take notes to remind me what I was hearing. And that was a very cordial conversation, and I was really wanting to learn more about him, and then that led to me seeing him on a regular basis for the next umpteen years until I became a VC in '96. So I had so I remember the office. I remember sitting down with him. I remember taking notes, but I don't remember what we talked about.
And this happened several times from 1980 to 2000. And so you were a journalist, and you were basically, you built relationships. And I really learned a lot from Brent Schlender in his book about Steve Jobs, about how the relationships go with the people, between the founders and the journalists. And there's this weird relationship where it's like the founders need the journalists, but they're also wary of them, right?
Well, that's always true. Every domain at some level. Maybe Trump doesn't agree, but
interesting. Yeah.
This is why I was so focused on the fact that I was born in 1952, which is 3 years before both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were born. And it took me a while to get out of college, but when I graduated in '75 is when the PC industry started to come together. Bill Gates was writing BASIC in Albuquerque in 1975. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were developing the Apple I at that time. Commodore, the other ones were coming along. And so I graduated the year that the personal computer industry started to form. It really wasn't an industry yet. There were these random people, but they're all working on the same thing. In fact, if you go back and look for the cover of the popular mechanics magazine that had the Altair on it, that's the cover date of that is probably the date you can assign as the beginning of the personal computer industry. Well, there are a lot of other things that had to happen. the microprocessors in particular. So then I moved to Boston after I graduated from college, and I got married, found jobs, ended up at Inc. magazine in 1979, so 4 years after I graduated. And that was when the personal computer industry started to emerge as an industry. There were software companies and there were hardware companies, and they started to coalesce around platforms. So the Apple II and the Commodore 64 were the two platforms that really emerged.
By platform, you mean hardware and software together with the kernel?
Application developers making programs for the computers as opposed to the computer maker making all the programs.
Oh, interesting.
And that was the first thing I noticed was, there's an independent software business here, and that's really interesting. And so we wrote an article on Inc. magazine about, that was the very first article we wrote, was, look, there's this brand new business here where people still don't even know how to package their products. Sometimes they put them in Ziploc bags and send them by mail. And then there were retailers, and retailers showed up, and they wanted the software people to put boxes and do branding. And so and it was a very rapid evolution of a whole industry. So when VisiCalc was first introduced as a spreadsheet on the Apple II, they did put it in a box. It wasn't in a Ziploc bag, but they charged $99, and it was like people were just buying it like crazy, and they're going like, "Oh, apparently they'll pay more than $99." So they started raising the price to the point where they hit 300, and they're still selling just as many units, and like the company's growing like wildfire. And the deal they did, they had a publisher called VisiCorp. It was called something else, but and the deal they did with VisiCorp was VisiCorp charged the retailer, so the wholesale price, and then they gave 30% of the money to VisiCalc, because that was kind of the way things worked in retailing. Is you'd sell something and you'd get like 30% of the price or 50% or whatever it was, and then because the publisher is doing the distribution and doing all the work of putting it in stores and making sure it's being marketed correctly, they'd get the majority. And that was a terrible deal, and it actually led to the failure of both companies because they were in such contention that along when the IBM PC started, Lotus Development introduced 1, 2, 3 as a better spreadsheet on the IBM PC. And people stopped buying the Apple II to run spreadsheets. They started buying the IBM PC, and Lotus took off. And meanwhile, left VisiCorp, and that took them 2 years to introduce a PC version. It was way too late and wasn't as good. So when things change really fast, and this is the instructive part for today, when they're changing really fast, you don't actually know what the signal is about what works, doesn't work.
What the signal is.
And every time there's a new technology gets adopted really fast, you don't know. Things are happening, and you have to make decisions now, and then 2 years later, you might look back and go, "Oh, crap, wasn't the right decision."
So there's one thing you said there about Lotus, because Lotus then became, I think we found it out from Bill Gross, and for our listeners, we have an episode with Bill Gross that we just published, but by the time this airs, probably about 2 months ago. So it was the first unicorn. There's some stories about Bill Gates that I want to get out, and particularly in the 90s, like what was going on with Microsoft in the 90s. But before we do that, I actually want to, because you just dropped the thing about how it's moving so fast. Right now, it's moving so fast. I feel like I'm in this uncanny valley every day, which is so strange because it does this thing, which when I started to learn how to program in 2015, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I checked myself into a meditation retreat so I could focus on it. I hated it so much that I went to a meditation retreat in order to focus my lifestyle so that I could do this thing that I hated very much. And there's some good stories I won't go into, but things are changing. What are in your world? What do you want to know most about AI? What are you trying to figure out? Where are the loose ends? What is the signal that you can't identify?
We've actually talked about this because I use my method of figuring out what's important is the degree to which it has impacts on individuals. This goes all the way back to VisiCalc, right? People were buying VisiCalc, buying an Apple II to get VisiCalc so they could use that program. And that affected their lives so much they were willing to put up with it. And I did that myself. I bought an Apple II and I set it up on the dining room. We've talked about this, and I ran VisiCalc, and I began to understand what everybody was talking about. I haven't. It's just changing, and this is where I'm having trouble keeping up with AI. But the newsletter I wrote was like, I don't see a lot of AI around here. What I mean by that was that it didn't have that impact on me, right? And partially I'm isolated from it because the first application that people are using is using it to improve your writing. And I don't need that.
Yeah.
So I love the idea, and this is the Apple ad for Apple Intelligence. Like, I love the idea that you can talk to your phone and it'll tell you who it is that you had coffee with 2 months ago because you can't remember, which is a problem I have all the time. So I'm wanting it to solve my problem, and it's not yet. Although it's getting to the point. This is part of the conversation we had about it helping me assemble anecdotes, is like as part of my memory for a book that I struggle to write. But that's of value to me. But what I really want is I want what I've always expected from my iPhone, which is I want my iPhone to help me. I don't want to have to tell it all the time what to do. I want it to tell me how it can help me. And that was the promise of Apple Intelligence. It got me so excited, and really pissed off that they
couldn't do it, and no one could do it.
They didn't even know they could do it when they announced it. It's like, that's so disappointing about Apple. And then they just got charged with ignoring a judge's orders, which is very true. It's right, spot on. Everybody's reacting, going, "Wow, this judge called them on it." So, Apple, now this is a little off the topic of AI, but Apple is kind of in a place where they're so disconnected from the fundamentals of technology, which is what Steve Jobs did for them, that they're actually not understanding the change. And this is the thing you're asking about. So when things are changing, you have to really understand what your position is. And this is why Satya Nadella has done a good job and Tim Cook's not doing so good. And Sam Altman's a question, and Zuckerberg's done a pretty good job, but maybe he's like behind it now because Llama's late and kind of buggy, and all this stuff's going on. So you don't have a definitive idea of what it is that you have to understand to make the right decisions, and that is technology. But the pace, when back in 1975, the pace was like, well, the Apple I came out, and it was like 3 years later they did the Apple II, and 3 years after that, IBM did the PC. And it's like, there's years involved. Now there's like months, maybe weeks. It's like stuff happens, and you have to.
But as you mentioned, the expectation from Apple, and I think the previous waves are changing all this, because there's the expectation that Apple will be able to, given that they have all of this stuff in the centralized database, all of the stuff, that they'll be able to solve that exact problem that you wanted.
They should do. And it's not in a central database. That's the wicked thing about AI, is the device. The device has all your information, and they've been very careful to keep it on the device, although they sync everything to iCloud, and iCloud is protected. And so they have to understand how to do that. Now, that's not a problem that anybody understands how to do. Right?
That's what I'm saying.
Amazon has promised the same thing, but they'll have your transactions, so they'll have your preferences and video and music. So the LLMs just have generic data, right? They don't have it applied to you. They might be able to tell something because you ask it certain questions, and maybe it can derive answers, but this is the hardest thing in the world, is because goes back to the Nemenda interview. We are real-time devices, right? Everything we do in real time. We don't have to sit there and munge a bunch of data to get the answer. And so how does the device mimic that? Now, Apple understood that's the problem because they did the ad, but they just didn't know how to deliver it.
They correctly identified the problem, and then realized after they had correctly identified the problem that they can't solve it, and they'd lied to, or not, they had done the vaporware thing. That's
me. That's me, right? There are a lot of people out there that are going, like, enterprises are buying a lot of this shit. And I don't see any benefit, at least for me, interacting with United Airlines and
So I think I can get to that one because I do understand the benefit that enterprise get from it, because it's the same thing that I get when I do my vibe coding, which is that it gives me leverage as an individual to do things I had never been able to do before. But this is the key problem, because technology didn't do that beforehand. Technology, it did it a little, like Notion would be a good example. The company I worked at, Notion did something. It kind of allowed individuals to leverage themselves, but they're really confused by it. It doesn't really do it. It really allowed the CEO founder to leverage himself and get all of his writing out there and stuff like that. But AI is like an exponential version.
I'll give you a different take on it.
Yeah.
And this would be critical for if we ever get Ray Ozzie to want to come on, because this is the thing that he noodled through and figured out about the enterprise, that the enterprise has a silos of data for HR, manufacturing, sales, whatever. They're all over and they're different systems and they don't share. What he tried to do is create a system that would suck all the data in and share it. But it was such a big program on every computer that it required a real commitment to do this. And it was expensive in the terms of the technology that was available. So Lotus Notes was this beautiful thing, and it really described the future of the enterprise. But since then, nothing's actually done that, except now, if you buy AI and you give it access to all the data and you start building your own LLM based on that data, and this is where the enterprise can really be changed completely.
And there is an example. McKinsey did it. McKinsey fine-tuned their own language model on 100 years of all of their knowledge, and so they're actually actively using this at McKinsey.
Now that's a consulting firm using its own data in its consulting practice, but that's actually a very uniform business, right? That's they're doing the same thing for every client.
Yeah, interesting.
Very hard, like in a manufacturing company, like Apple, like Tesla, right? To integrate all the systems through the AI, and building an LLM is a difficult process. That requires very specialized talent, which most enterprises don't have. So I think they're buying this stuff because they want that.
Yeah, they want that, but they're not going to get it.
They're probably not going to get what they want, right? They'll be applied to one piece of their company, and they still won't be able to have this kind of intelligence in the enterprise, which is really the promise. That problem I don't think has been solved, but it might be Microsoft that's the closest to it, because they did this deal with OpenAI and they've been developing their own LLMs, and they actually understand the enterprise, which is amazing because it's not their original business, but that Satya Nadella has infused that company with an understanding of the enterprise.
So
could be. I don't really know.
Is the reason why it's all siloed, is it only access control? Is it only the fact that access control is widely distributed?
It's because the technology is built around the individual. So, and I've talked to a number of people that have been creative in thinking about this over the years. Because companies grow, they buy other companies, they develop new things, and they're big, and they have operations all over the place. Nobody's really figured out a really fully integrated architecture for the enterprise. Now, Apple is actually pretty close. Its own IT operations are pretty stunning. You know how they keep track of all the way from making silicon up through all of the components inside the iPhone or the Mac, and then assembly and delivery to the customers through their own stores. Wow. That's such an incredibly integrated system, but they don't talk about it, and it's very hard to find out how they run those systems. But they're probably one of the most sophisticated IT operations. It's probably true that Tim Cook knows what's going on every day, everywhere in Apple. And that's a benefit of IT. So, but what other company is as vertically integrated and as massively well run as Apple, right? Maybe Netflix. Netflix might be, maybe. They have kind of two operations. Amazon's, they got AWS, and they got retailing, and they got hardware, and they got, I don't know how good they're obviously running on AWS, so they probably have pretty sophisticated, but these are the tech companies. You take a company that's not in the tech business, right? And trying to figure that out. it's applied after the fact, right after the company's gotten big and is trying to integrate. So there's always a race to try to figure out how to use IT. And that's
because
if
it
you
gives
have
you
a
this leverage.
tech-savvy CEO who understands the value of IT, which like United, I'm fascinated by United because the IT guy at United, maybe because the CEO understands it, they have transformed their infrastructure. So it's like a real-time information system. There's still holes in it, but if you're going along doing it, they know who you are. They use the loyalty program to know who their customers are. They know which seat you're in. They know what your preferences are when the flight attendant comes up and goes, "Oh, Mr. Alsop," and it's like, that's pretty mind-blowing. You feel it's not the way United used to be. So there's been a transformation there. So there are certain enterprises that are really good at information technology, but usually they're not. You can count on them not being.
Yeah.
Exception.
It reminds me of the recent experiences I've been using with the Argentine government to try to navigate their web system.
You talk about government. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. So underneath the Doge thing that's going on is here's a technically competent tech founder, Musk, who's been bringing in his programmers, and they're trying to get under the cover and modernize the systems, and everybody's interpreting that as, they want to look at my social security record or whatever. They probably do, but
So why is it, last 10 minutes or so, what is it about a company and a founder that is able to allow them to move these giant systems? You talk about Ray Ozzie, who built this thing that was really good, but nobody bought it because they were...
A lot of people bought it. It was a successful product, but it didn't ultimately work because they couldn't get everybody to buy it.
So, but what is it about an IT company like Apple being able to... that's the question. What we don't know, but you've been able to track this company long enough to understand the characteristics. What allows Tim Cook to understand what's going on at every part of the company? Is it the company structure? Is it the integration with IT? What does the integration of that IT look like? Yeah.
So it's like, you and I use the cloud, right? We use cloud storage and we use applications on the web. We're using Riverside to record this. Where data is stored, how it's stored, how applications are programmed against that, how it's secured. All of these different elements are all part of enterprise systems. Because Apple is so fully integrated. Well, that's interesting. I don't know who they buy their servers from. Be interesting to know that. I don't think they build their own. Google builds their own. They have this massive infrastructure for search that is entirely owned and operated. And in fact, it's subject to a Justice Department suit right now where the Justice Department is threatening to make them give everybody else access to their search index, which is a pretty big threat. So it's all the services or servers that you either own or rent that store the data that the company operates on. A manufacturing company has to know where its suppliers are, has to have some system of making sure their suppliers are legitimate and capable of delivering, right? Because most manufacturing operates now in real time, right? The stuff has to show up, go into one end of the assembly line and come out the other end as a finished product. It's a really complicated thing to do, and it's really a function of how well you can control the whole system, and then what's your objective in having the system. So in a ideal world, and I'd say Netflix is probably the closest to this, is it's completely driven by gaining your interest and engagement as a customer of them. Now, so like UPS is actually better as the stores, the FedEx store, the UPS stores. The UPS stores are franchised, so they're independently owned. They maybe have some owned and operated. FedEx stores are all owned by FedEx. So FedEx thinks in terms of pick up a package, move it through its system, and deliver it to a person. And their sensitivity to the person is much better than UPS's, because UPS is oriented towards the driver who delivers, right? So they give control over the whole process to the to the driver. I'd imagine that going from being a UPS driver to being a FedEx driver is a major shift, right? Because FedEx doesn't allow you to reroute a package where UPS does. It's like this. I mean, you just think of these systems. It's like, what's the point of the company in the first place? Like, banks are really interesting because they are consumed by technology. They are technology companies because money is, nobody. It's just a representation of value. And so if you don't have your information systems straight as a bank, and you're more worried about where your cash is, like how it's stored or whatever, I mean, you have to really understand what your business is. So some banks are better at dealing with consumers, and some banks are better at dealing with businesses, merchant banks, commercial banks. This all makes a big difference.
So one quick note, Apple is expanding its U.S. manufacturing footprint and will begin producing servers in Houston, Texas later in 2025. So they're starting to build their own servers.
So we're building Macintoshes in Texas. No, they were building the big computers, the big desktop computers.
The big servers, you said. Yeah.
No, servers, they don't make servers. These are...
But that's what I'm saying, is that they're expanding their U.S. manufacturing and will begin... Oh, no, the new facility will assemble servers designed by Apple, powered by Apple Silicon, and tailored for... No, you're right, that it's a manufacturing of computers. It's not the servers they're using in their own... Yeah, okay.
Well, anyway, yeah, they started actually making... What are the high-end Mac Pros? The Studio, I think it is called, or something. It's like the one the graphic designers use. That's been manufactured in Texas for a number of years. So they realized years ago that they were too dependent on China, but they were not making high priority products. Now they're they're getting really serious about it. Right? They're shipping components from China to India where there's no tariff, having the phones assembled in India where there's a lower tariff before they're shipped to the U.S., and they're making all the U.S. phones in India now.
I had such a good question. It's gone now, but now I've got a new question. It's not as good, but why is the stock market going up when tariffs are coming, and the just-in-time manufacturing thing that you just mentioned is going out the window? If tariffs go through, it's all done, right? It's apocalypse. What's going on?
No, because the companies will adjust. The reason they're going down and then up is because people can't figure out if the tariffs are actually going to happen or not, because he keeps going, oh, well, we'll wait 90 days. Well, in 90 days, will they actually do it? So it's obviously become focused on China now. And that's the part that people are taking seriously. That's not the whole economy. That's just people that make stuff in China and ship it to the U.S. for consumers.
Isn't that everything? I mean,
no, not necessarily. I mean, we still build cars in the U.S., and there are a lot of parts that are made in the U.S. and Europe. And so it's not everything.
What is it, 20%, 30%?
Well, it depends what you mean. Of what?
Of all the stuff that we consume in the United States.
It's about 20%.
Yeah, coming from China.
China specifically, and then there's a bunch coming from Mexico and Canada. And it's not just products, it's oil and gas. That's why it's so complicated. So the underlying belief is that ultimately Trump doesn't want to trash the economy, which is why the stock recovers. Because people are going, oh, they're sitting there going, okay, this Trump guy, he's fucking with us and making it all really difficult to predict, and there's no stability. So he'll probably end up making the right decision because he doesn't want to trash the economy. Right? It goes down to the politics too. So we're 18 months, primaries a little sooner for the midterms, and they have a razor thin majority in the House. So if they lose that majority, Trump's executive orders go out the window. Then Congress will be run by the Democrats, and they're not going to let them get away with this shit. Not the way the Republicans are. So, it's a big bet that he can get everything done before the midterms, and at the midterms still end up controlling the House.
It's so crazy. And now, due to all the information changes, that everybody is on such a different news cycle. In the 90s, it would take, if you can imagine if drones had showed up in our airspace in the 90s, how long people would have been talking about that, like they did back in December 2024. And now everybody's forgotten 5 days later. Like,
Yeah,
what
the
is that going to
government
do
said
to
they
our
they
government?
weren't the enemy, so it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. What is that going to do to our government? That people have the
Well,
voting
that's part of
population?
what Musk is
Yeah.
trying to do, but he's such a hateful guy, nobody understands it, is he really wants to modernize the infrastructure for the government.
No, but
I
I'm
mean,
saying the voter culture, the fact that none of the voters have an attention span of larger than 3 days, like the news cycle
that's already
disappears.
happened. I mean, why did Trump make that margin? It's a very thin margin. It was 1.5 million votes.
Yeah,
The the stuff that was going on at the time was that
yeah,
Biden looked old and
yeah,
was spending money like it was going out of style, and the MAGA people, the non-MAGA people agreed with the MAGA people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we've got Trump. That happened. Now it's a lot of them are going like, oh shit, what do we do?
I'm in that position. It's like it's so strange. The meme coins and the tariffs. Those two things are just like, well, I'm not sure about those things. A lot of the other stuff is good too.
Oh,
But
the Journal and the Times did a. I should probably send you the daily, the
yeah,
podcast they did on this. The degree to which Trump is enriching himself
yeah, it's crazy. It's
as
nuts.
the president of
Yeah,
the United States is astonishing, and he's not hiding it. It's all right up there, like this.
yeah, so crazy. Well, interesting times.
Yeah.
Tune in next week.